So heartily welcome to this workshop comparing the values between the tall ships race events and the Volvo Ocean Race, Clipper and Maritime festivals. It's very big differences you will hear from Maria. And welcome Maria and Maria Monian Lee. And you is the co-founder and the managing director of Milestone Inventive in Dublin, on the island. And you have been working with tall ships, with the Volvo Ocean Race and many regattas and big events. So we are very eager to listen to you. And once again, welcome. And also I will introduce the new person in the staff of Sail Training International. I lost your Paul Thompson, and he will introduce himself after Maria. So, and once again, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lillian. I'll just try and anchor this mic. As you can see, I'm very technical. So I have to admit, before I start, I was quite challenged by the subject matter of today's presentation for two reasons. I'm very conscious that I'm speaking from an Irish perspective, number one, a host port perspective, number two, and obviously I don't represent any of the three events which I'm about to speak about. So I'm conscious that I should not misrepresent them and not show any bias towards any particular one or anything like that. So if I seem a little bit careful, I hope you will appreciate. In terms of where I'm coming from, what my experience has been is that I have been involved in the producing of the hosting of one Volvo Ocean Race in Galway in 2009, two Clipper visits to Ireland, one in 2010 to Cork, and one in this year in 2012 to Derry, or as some people would know it, Londonderry. They prefer nowadays to call it Legendary, if you're wondering. But, and also have been involved most recently with the Tall Ships visit to Dublin in August. And the role that I played there was my company, we were the commercial agents for the event. So it was our responsibility to bring in the money. And so that's the perspective I'm speaking from, and it has given me quite a unique outlook on the three events and the way in which they compare. But the other thing that challenged me before I really get into it is, am I talking about value or values? And they're two very different things, but they're also related. So value, most people would understand in terms of things like economic impact or legacy benefit or media value or the value to the tourism industry or to a city in terms of development. So that's fairly simple to understand, and actually I'm going to refer to it for the rest of the presentation as impact rather than value, just to differentiate it from the values, which are the reasons why we are all here. The values, the things and the elements that people hold dear in association with the event. So in terms of something like Tall Ships, you're talking about youth development, you're talking about education, you're talking about sailing development, you're talking about cooperation, you're talking also maybe about heritage. And those are very strong, very clear values, and maybe with the other events, it's not so clear what their values are, but they do exist. So I hope you appreciate that I'm trying to make the distinction between both, but I'm actually going to speak about both because you can't divorce them. So in terms of the presentation, these are the three events, and I'm also going to go on at the end just to maybe give my opinion, and that's what it is, opinion of the success factors, what it takes to be successful in hosting any or all of these three events based on the experiences that I've been fortunate to have. So I'm going to take them in no particular order, and I'm going to talk about maybe impact first and economic impact. So as you're aware, Galway in the west of Ireland, a city of only 70,000 people, has been fortunate to host the Volvo Ocean Race on 2 occasions. And on the first occasion in 2009, I was the commercial director. And so these figures are very personal to me, and I can absolutely stand over them. And while I wasn't involved beyond some of the early stage planning in 2012, these are the figures that are just recently published. And as you can see, all of the report is not yet available. And that's the case for some of the other events as well from this year. Not all of the reports are available, or if, in fact, in some cases, the reports are completed but not published, and so I can't give specific numbers. But what you see here immediately is very contrasting differences between the impact of this event coming to Galway in 2009 and 2012. And this, for me, underlines the difficulty with economic impact figures. They always exist within a context. They always exist around a methodology, and methodologies may vary from one researcher or evaluator to another. So, for example, the economic impact for 2009 was produced by Deloitte, the well-known consultancy, and in 2012 it was produced by PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, obviously they will have tried to make figures comparable, but naturally there are going to be some differences. So you can see a very big difference in the first set of figures, the economic impact. So 56 million, let's say 55.8 million in 2009, and 35 million in 2012. And so what's the reason for that? Well, it's actually quite simple. In 2009, the event took place over 15 days, and in 2012, it took place over 7 days. So obviously, you're going to have different figures. But there's a core element of economic impact, which is almost like a fixed impact. It's going to be the same whether the event takes place over 1 day, or 5, or 10, or 15, in the sense that a big portion of the economic impact is what the rights holder, the owner of the race or the event, what they bring to the host port in terms of the number of teams and the activity that they undertake in that port. And that can be it is a core element, and it doesn't change enormously. But there is actually another reason for differences between economic impact figures that is not in any way scientific. But I'm going to hold that, and I'm going to explain to you later on what I believe it to be, and that's the surprise element of this presentation, shall we say. Moving on to the next event, tall ships. And it has been in recent years 3 times to Irish shores. So Belfast 2009, Waterford 2011, and Dublin most recently. It was also in Waterford in 2007, but I just thought, let's not go back too far. And you can see in terms of economic impact, very, very strong figures, and especially when you consider that something like the tall ships visits for 3 or 4 days. In each of these cases, it was 4 days in Dublin recently, but just 3 days in Waterford. And I think, if I'm right, 3 days in Belfast as well. So if you compare it with the previous figures for, say, the Volvo Ocean Race for Galway in 2012 versus the tall ships in Dublin in August in 2012, you've got 35 million for 7 days from the Volvo, and 23 million for 3.5, almost 4 days from the tall ships. So in terms of economic impact, it's extremely similar. But also, when you're looking at economic impact, you also need to look at the costs of hosting and staging the event. And in both cases, the costs really should be reasonably similar. What will cost more for a host port in terms of infrastructure for something like the Volvo is counterbalanced by the fact that maybe the marketing costs are not quite as high, because essentially in paying the very high hosting rights fee for something like the Volvo, you get the marketing benefit as almost a given or a guarantee, whereas with other events you have to work that and create it yourself and invest further within it. So it's as you can see, it's very difficult to try and compare like with like, I guess, and there are so many other factors as well to consider, but I think nobody's really here because they're trying to decide, will I host a Volvo or a Clipper or a tall ships? It's rather, maybe to gain some perspective on the fact that maybe there are people who host tall ships races and do so frequently, to put it into the broader context, especially when we're all going out and looking for extra resources, either from public bodies or from commercial sponsors or that type of thing. So looking then at the third event from the point of view of economic impact, the Clipper race visited Cork in 2010, and again, I was the festival director for Cork City, and while it spent 3 days in Cork City, it actually spent 2 weeks in another port within the county, just a short distance away. I also was fortunate to be involved with the Londonderry 2012 event. And I know I said I would not express any kind of bias, but actually I have to. That event, the visit of the Clipper race to Derry in just July of this year, it was probably the most special experience I have ever had with a maritime festival and a maritime event. But I'm not going to tell you why just yet, because did I mention I'm going to hold that reason just for a few seconds, but all will be revealed. Unfortunately, the Derry figures are not yet published, but I know what they are. And as you can see, I've used the word more spectators and more media impact. I can tell you that it's significantly more, and in some cases by a factor of 10, the return on investment to Derry versus Cork. But equally, I can also tell you that the investment by Derry and their agencies and the way in which they integrated their activities across a number of government agencies and government bodies, and how they activated their sponsorship of the race in all of the ports that they visited, was quite an incredible model of best practice in this area. So they got the results, definitely higher return on investment, but definitely the investment was higher as well. So these things are all most definitely tightly linked. I'm going to move on now to just look at what I was talking about, values, the more intangible element of this. And I've done a little exercise in looking at all of the economic impacts. They're all expressed in these terms. These are the common terms, the common language across all of these studies and reports. So global media exposure, direct and indirect economic impact. And there's actually another figure, if we go deeper into the figures, there's another figure where you need to be quite careful, because they are presented and interpreted differently. What I tend to do is just simply add up all of the economic impacts and try and compare them on that basis, because it can be quite difficult. The other one is a platform to showcase. So the idea is there that you are showcasing the marine or the maritime infrastructure of a port, or you are showcasing the tourism product or the hospitality product, or it could be, in some cases, the education product, whether it's a maritime college or some such thing. Tourism marketing, a catalyst for legacy infrastructure development. This is absolutely key, and I have seen it many, many times. I know in the cities of Derry and Cork, there are now marinas in place, which otherwise would not have been there were it not for the visit of the Clipper race. And those marinas are delivering continuous benefit to those cities in terms of visiting boats and visiting events on a smaller scale. The social and sporting legacy is absolutely key, and clearly in terms of tall ships, it's the social legacy that's probably one of the highest values in terms of youth development. And then obviously business to business and consumer opportunities arising directly from the hosting of the event. So these are the headlines. I've taken it one step further, kind of maybe just distilled them down, simplified them a little bit more, and tried to connect them to the idea of the values. But actually, before I show you this exercise, you need to understand that it is incomplete, because quite simply, it is not for me to say how these events compare in terms of value. It is for the boards and trustees and directors and stakeholders of all of these events, the owners of them, to say. But I began the exercise and it showed me something kind of interesting. And that is simply that what you may not value can actually be what you deliver strongest on. So while they are connected, they can be disconnected as well. So I just put together this little desk exercise in terms of a value spectrum. And as I said, I qualify this by saying it is absolutely incomplete. But I've taken the various events, I've played with their logos, I've made them larger or smaller, and just in 2 cases I've tried to expand the model and say, okay, well, here's what I think. So obviously, from the point of view of youth development, the importance of that to tall ships, as you see there, is big. It's the largest logo, and its delivery on that level is also equally big. But then if you take something like economic impact, it's not something that I hear frequently in terms of tall ships, and certainly not at a conference such as this, but possibly locally when you go to the host ports. You don't hear about that as a value of Sail Training International or the tall ships races to anything like the same extent. But what we've just seen in the economic impact figures is that tall ships delivers far above the extent to which it may value that particular aspect or element of its makeup. So this is not meant to be anything other than just a kind of an exercise to look at things laterally and that type of thing. But I just found it kind of interesting. So then the key thing with one of the key benefits that all of the events have in common is legacy. And quite honestly, when you look into the reports and you compare what people say about legacy, you have to do an awful lot of stripping out of some of the language to try and get down to the substance of what the legacy elements are considered to be. And you know what, I did that. I just distilled and distilled and distilled, and I came up with just these 4 items that are common and consistent across the board. So the legacy of hosting these various events is that obviously they can be a catalyst to development. And let's face it, very often when ports need to justify the level of investment, and particularly of public money, into the hosting of something such as a tall ships or a Clipper or a Volvo, they need to make the business case for doing so, more so than the legacy case. So this idea of it being a catalyst to development is very much a key a component of that, and it crosses over both legacy and the harder commercial dimension of all of this. And then you have youth development, youth sailing, and future events is another interesting one. It is generally presented that somebody's experience in hosting something like a tall ships gives them capacity or builds capacity for them to be able to host future events. So this is really just, I suppose, a distillation of the key pointers. But this was my surprise. This is the thing I've been holding. Hang on, can I have a drum roll? There is an X factor. When you talk about the ability to deliver either value or impact, or deliver on values and the values of a community or an organization, people's success in that regard can vary so widely, and we've seen that. I illustrated it a short while ago, the differences between take Clipper's experience in Ireland. And as I looked across these events, and this is where this becomes a little bit subjective, knowing the makeup of the events and knowing the motivation of all the people behind them, the X factor is actually something really, 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 really simple. Heart, passion. The extent to which the hosting of any one of these events is approached by the immediate stakeholders, by the broader community, by the public, by the country, the extent to which it is approached with passion determines the results. And there is a direct correlation between as I say, what happened in Derry in this July and what happened in Cork a couple of years previously. And the difference was that in Derry, there was a huge hunger for, how would you say, excuse me a second. This happened to me in the last presentation. My mouth went dry and people began to be unable to understand a word I was saying, so excuse me. But what happened in Derry was that there was such a hunger for Derry to take its place after years of conflict on a global stage, on any level, that I saw unprecedented, thank you, I saw unprecedented levels of passion, from children to people in shops to taxi drivers to the individuals working within the local authority, who normally we consider them maybe civil servants and they're just doing their job, and they shouldn't be so passionate, but every single one of them, it was a personal thing to them that this would succeed. And this is the X factor. I think we saw it as well in, certainly in Galway in 2009 and also to an extent in 2012, but we saw it in both Dublin and Waterford, because there's another dimension to this, which is the smaller the community and the smaller the city, the more passion you will have, because there is more community spirit, there is more pulling together and coming together, and even something so simple as the fact that the people who work in the municipal agencies or the government departments, they're also part of the community. They're not commuters in from outside or that type of thing. So then it becomes personal, and it is reflected essentially in the, as you see here, in the expressions on people's faces, and that's what makes a really good event great, and it's also what delivers the economic impact. And in terms of, you know, revenue return, it can mean the difference between over a 3-day hosting of a tall ships. It can mean massive difference in terms of what people spend at the bars and what they spend on merchandise and what they spend with the concession traders who are there on site, and that all pushes up economic impact, and it's really quite incredible. So then, as I promised, I said I would take a quick look at the keys to success, and it's very simple. Deliver return on investment, oh yeah, and don't lose money. Put the two of them together and you're probably going to be fine. And the return on investment is the interesting one, naturally, because that's how you define it. It's everybody has a different definition. Return on investment for some people could be that the event will break even. For others, it could be that it makes a profit. For others, it could be that they can communicate a clear message. So again, that was the case in Derry. The city was trying to rebrand itself, and their approach to rebranding was really, really interesting. They picked incredibly strong, vibrant colours, because everybody's image of a city like Derry was grey and dull and grim and, quite frankly, horrific. And if you think of the footage, particularly the very fact that so much of it began in the 1970s, it was all black and white. So they picked these incredibly vibrant colours. They branded the Londonderry Clipper boat in these amazing fluorescent pinks and yellows, and then they connected it to the city, and they branded the whole city with those colours as well. And suddenly you have lifted the mood of the entire community and lifted the perception of the entire area, in fact, because it's much broader than the city. So from their point of view, they had a very clear strategy. They said, we are going to tell our new story, because they didn't like the old one. I mean, who would? A truly dreadful story, but they began to tell their new story of hope and youth and vibrancy and creativity and excitement, really. So, and actually that's another word for my X factor, and I've used it in other events, maybe non-maritime events. Where there is mischief, there is magic. So it's very important that little bit of ingredient is sprinkled over the top. Somebody said to me once, just to explain, I used to I was the chief executive of St. Patrick's Festival, which everybody knows in Ireland, St. Patrick's Day is enormous. It's enormous around the world. So it was my responsibility to run the Dublin Parade and the festival that went with it. And my chairman, who was a very eminent individual, Senator Fergal Quinn, he said to me once, almost the first day, he said, "You can't make fun if you're not having fun." And that has always remained with me. So again, if you're involved in hosting any of these events, but particularly at Tall Ships, let's face it, it's really, really important to stop and ask yourself, are we having fun here? Because it can get very serious, and it can get very tedious, and it can become very hard work, and you lose sight of the excitement and the mischief and the magic. And what I'm really trying to say to you here is that it is, I see a clear correlation between the magic and the economic impact. So it gives us then permission to invest our time in the extra touches and elements that just make a good event absolutely great. So, sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but coming back to delivering on return on investment, however you define it, clearly very often it's about money. So maximising commercial revenue potential. And I'll say a bit more about that when I come to the part about not losing money. But fully integrate local business is a really key thing. And here again, this is what I saw Derry do very successfully, but also to a great extent both Waterford and Dublin Tall Ships. Let's take the Dublin example. What we strove to do was to develop a package that would integrate business into the ownership of the event to some extent. Now, this was a sponsorship package. It did bring in a little bit of revenue, but that wasn't the main objective of it. It was simply to make sure that when you visited Dublin and you went into a pub, that you knew you were in the city in which Tall Ships was being hosted, because there were pieces of bunting, there were flags, there were even beer mats with Tall Ships on them. And it is possible to be a visitor to a city or a port which is hosting a maritime event and never actually visit the city, and never actually bring your business to the city, because so many ports in particular are at a remove from the city centre. They're maybe a couple of miles away or whatever it might be. And so they can be very disconnected from local business. But ultimately, it's that local business who are the ratepayers, who support the local authorities, who essentially call the shots. And when you're looking for resources to host the next time, if the businesses weren't happy the last time you did it, well, it's going to be much more difficult the next time. The key thing is very much building local ownership and pride. And this is what I mentioned earlier, that you'll get into a taxi and they will tell you with excitement what is happening, and that you will get on a bus and people are chatting about this. It's actually something that people pull back from doing when they're the host of the event. They're almost afraid to let go of control. They very much building ownership is giving away ownership, and it's scary. But when it happens, it's magical. And if you're the organizer, it happens when people on the street start to tell you what's in the program, and then you've done it. And they're telling you all the wrong thing most of the time, but it doesn't matter. They own it, whether they're right or wrong. They own it, and they're going to communicate that onwards. Another one in terms of delivering a return on investment is to develop a fan base. And this is something that's very key to Tall Ships, and to another extent to Clipper, and less so to Volvo. But we had the experience in Galway in 2009 with the Volvo Ocean Race, in that we had our own team. The Green Dragon team was the Irish team, it was the Galway team, the boat was identified with Galway, and there were Irish crew on board. And I can tell you that the fan base for that team, they were passionate about it, and that translated into very significant levels of sale of merchandise and very significant revenue for the event. So in terms of delivering return on investment, a fan base is a very valuable commodity to have. Likewise, looking at the difference between the hosting of Clipper in Derry and Cork, Derry invested heavily in providing bursaries for local people to sail and do a leg or do the whole of the Clipper race. And those local people got to tell their story in the local media. Their relations got to talk about what it was like to have them on the high seas and to be worried about them or excited for them. So everybody took them to the heart. So they were built up as heroes. And that was just tremendously powerful in terms of delivering the numbers who turned up and attended the event and delivering the passion and everything like that. I could give you examples of cases where without the fan base it has failed, but actually that would just not be fair. But do believe me, you can't fake it. In other words, you simply can't take a boat and slap a country's logo on it and say, there you go, that's your ship, or that's your crew, or that's your team. People have to buy in, and we're all intelligent, and it's just not that simple. Then another key area is just to align the sponsorship product offering with the sponsorship marketplace. And a lot of people, they set out trying to believing that it's the business to business euro or dollar that's the easiest to get or the most valuable. But in actual fact, what I have found consistently with all of these events is it is the consumer driven euros. It is the brands who want to engage with large audiences that consistently deliver. And it's actually an easier sell. It's a lot of smaller amounts that all add up, as opposed to having all your eggs in one very corporate basket or whatever it might be. And then just finally, to maximize the media opportunities, it's where people invest in media activity on behalf of their own port that things are successful. You can't expect to get the column inches unless you are feeding the media. And feeding the media means investing in footage, for example, or photographs, or social media, or building a relationship with key media people. But it's surprising the number who actually sit back and expect it to come to them, and, well, life's not like that. So key to the whole thing, I would say, is to make the right decisions early, and the early decisions right. So many times I've just seen that people leave decisions they know 3 years out, and sometimes even 4 years out, that they are going to be hosting a tall ships or a Volvo or whatever it might be, and they hold off and they hold off on making the key decisions, and opportunity is continuously being missed. And on a very simple level, I can explain this. When you go to local business in a port and you're asking them to invest a significant amount of money, if you can ask them to do that over 3 years, it's a much, much easier ask. And if they commit contractually to doing so, pay the first year, well, you can take those commitments to somewhere to have the rest of your activity financed on that basis. And so people don't realize how much they're limiting their own options by not acting early, acting decisively early. And equally, I don't advocate rushing into things. Careful thought needs to go into the structures and the strategy. Not losing money. The key thing for me is very, very simple. I have seen far too often, I'm going to be very honest about this, cases where all of the focus is on revenue and none of the focus is on keeping costs as tight and as streamlined as they possibly can be. And it breaks my heart every time to see money wasted. And it is, and it's continually wasted. And it's wasted by not having a very tight operation. You need things to be small and disciplined with clear lines of responsibility. And that in no way takes away from the opportunities for volunteerism. In actual fact, what it does is it strengthens the opportunities for volunteerism, because those clear lines of responsibility within a small, let's call them a professional team, will assist the volunteer teams to know exactly where they stand and to have the resources to be able to act within their own parameters. But it's actually all about empowerment and, quite simply, identifying the role, the key roles involved in delivering a host port or a stopover or whatever it might be, recruiting for those roles in a very clinical manner, open calls, and not just picking, oh yeah, I think I know somebody that might fit that. Throwing out a very broad call, essentially, for people to come forward. Then empowering those people, giving them the responsibility, giving them the ownership, and letting them off to do the job. And your job then is to monitor them. And if they're not doing the job, goodbye. And you replace them fairly quickly. But the more responsibility, the more tightness there is within an organisation. I've seen the best events delivered with just 3 people, but they're 3 very empowered people who are committed. And you know what? They share the values of the organisation. And it's possible to screen for that as well. And it absolutely works. Which actually I should have put the committee's question next. I'm actually a big fan of building committees of stakeholders and groups and that type of thing, but not without clear parameters and not without clear definition of responsibility and that type of thing. Sometimes it has happened, and I've seen it consistently happen, that the organisation turns in on itself trying to support the committees, figuring out what they're trying to do, and everybody's eye gets taken off the ball, and the ball is the day on which the ships arrive. And you need to stay focused on that and not on what can develop, which is politics and all of the other distractions, is the way I would define them. Then finally, in terms of not losing money, the extent to which stakeholders determine commercial scope. And again, I've seen it time and time again where stakeholder organisations will say, yes, we could raise money in this manner by, for example, those of you who heard me earlier, by, for example, taking on an alcohol brand as a sponsor. But if the stakeholders say, no, this is against our principles, then you need to know that early. You need to know that that's not going to be a possibility. It's far too late when you've got the sponsor on board and a stakeholder says, no, I can't be associated with this. So having realistic expectations about, for example, how much commercial revenue can be earned within the broader context. And you know, if the answer is 0, if the stakeholder investment means that you cannot take commercial funds, well, that's fine, at least you know, and you work within that. But equally, far too often, it's not clear, and therefore it leads to problems down the road. So back to the same thing, make the right decisions early, and the early decisions right. And I hope that helps. I think I might have dwelt a little bit too long on the opinion part of this, which is my own ideas in terms of what works and what doesn't. But you know what? I just thought I might as well share this. But if I can leave you with anything, it is the idea that passion works and passion delivers, and it's fun. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Maria. Before we take the questions to Maria, I would like to introduce the new Assistant Commercial Director at STI. Please, Mr. Tony Robinson.
Good afternoon. I'm conscious of the fact that I stand between you and coffee. This will be brief. We're on the second day of the conference. I'm just going to load this presentation. Please just bear with me just for 1 second. Well, good afternoon. Yeah, I've just literally last week I've joined the STI as the Deputy Commercial Director working with Gwyn Brown. Gwyn just asked me to say a few words because in a former life I was the the sales director for the Global Challenge, the Round the World Yacht Race, which was the event run by Che Blythe. You may have seen it. It doesn't run anymore, but it was the event that featured 12 of these steel yachts, which used to go around the world the wrong way. The crew were paying amateurs in the same way that the Clipper race is based on crew that are paying amateurs. Quite different to the Volvo Ocean Race, which is a race that features professional sailors. The big difference between the Global Challenge and the Clipper race is that we did have a sponsor community which included big brands like Barclays, BP, and we used to go to some of the major ports around the world, places like Cape Town, Sydney, and so on. I just wanted to compare the values of the 3 different events, and with the Volvo Ocean Race, obviously you've got the elite professional sailors. They're at the pinnacle of the sport. The Clipper race and the Global Challenge races was are very much more about amateur sailors, pay to play, people that are paying to have the experience of sailing around the world. So they're very different in their sort of their core values. The Volvo race is about extreme performance. The Clipper race is more about people having this extraordinary adventure of a lifetime, the adventure of their life. But the thing I wanted to focus on, just very briefly, was the quality of the visitor experience that people have in the ports of call. I don't know whether you've ever been to any of these events, but if you've been to a Volvo race or a Clipper race, it's not always as accessible as you might like it to be. And these are some of the comments that I've actually heard from people that have been to some of these events. You know, they've gone down to see the event, but they've not actually had the ability to get close to the ships, to get close to the crews. Often the boats are locked into a marina, and it's not an open and accessible event. So the tall ships races are different, and I think there are three reasons that they are so different to these other events. The first one is the core values that the event has. The second one is the scale of the event, and the third one is the amount of access that people have to the event. So just very briefly, just to look at those in turn, we have with the tall ships races some very, very powerful core values. It's all about young people, and it's about young people having a personal development experience. It's also about international friendship. You might have your own views on what the core values are for the tall ships races, but these are the things that I think are perhaps important. They're very inclusive values. If you look at the Volvo Ocean Race, it's about extreme performance in high-performance sailing boats and elite sailors. If you're not a keen sailor, you may not have a particular interest in the sport. Most people have an interest in the development of young people, and they have an interest in international friendship. So because we've got very strong core values, we can appeal to a very broad audience. We can appeal to a very broad public audience. Much broader, perhaps, than these other round-the-world yacht races that go on. And what that gives us is a very strong set of themes that we can use to engage the media. So whether you're a port or a vessel or a sail training operator, you can go out and you can engage the media with these very powerful themes. And if you're looking for sponsorship as a port, if you're going out to your local companies, again, you've got a very strong platform from which to go and try and find those sponsors, because there aren't many companies that would say that they're not interested in the development of young people. So it gives you a very good platform to go and get that sponsorship. The second of those three is the scale of the spectacle, and I don't think we should underestimate this. I mean, if we've been to see the tall ships, we may start to take it for granted, but I know that people I talk to, when they first go down and see the tall ships in port, it takes their breath away. It literally takes their breath away, the scale of the spectacle. You know, we may have 50 or 100, even more than 100 vessels in port. They range from small boats up to big Class A ships. If you compare that to a normal yacht race, the Volvo Ocean Race might have 8 boats. The Clipper Race might have 10. The Global Challenge used to have 12. So we have the scale of the number of vessels and the size of the vessels. We may have 2,000 crew turning up in a port. When a round-the-world yacht race turns up, it may have 200. So that's an order of magnitude of difference. We have all of these people coming off the boat in the port. And with the tall ships race, the vessels are moored around the city. They will take over the whole of the city waterfront. With a yacht race, they'll be in a marina or they'll be in one corner of a dock. Again, it's a massive difference in terms of the scale. We must never take this for granted. So what you get with that scale is stunning visual impact. If you go to see a Volvo Ocean Race stopover, you'll have to go and find the boats. There'll be 8 boats in a dock somewhere. If you go to a city that's hosting the tall ships race, it will be there in front of you. You can't miss it. So that you've got this amazing visual backdrop. And earlier today, Maria talked about the lottery being held with the backdrop of the ships on the TV. And that's what we've got, and we mustn't take it for granted. The other big thing is the trainees. These 2,000 or more crew, they're everywhere. If you walk around the port, there are all of these trainees with big smiles on their faces, all wearing their ship's clothing, and they're ambassadors for the race. If you go into one of the other professional yacht races, you may bump into 1 or 2 of the crew in town, but you don't get that impact from the crew. So, I mean, this is a crew shot from the last Global Challenge that was run back in 2004-05, and there were about 200 crew. That was the extent of the crew that were present with that event. And that's a shot of the fleet up in London. That's the visual impact of a round the world yacht race fleet. It's impressive, but it's not that impressive. And that's the difference. You know, we must realise that we've got this amazing thing. The scale of this spectacle, this awesome spectacle, is something that will attract lots of different types of people, different stakeholders, sponsors, future trainees, and so on. The third area is public access. And, you know, with our races, the fleet is moored along a large waterfront. The visitors can get close to the boat. Even though there may be hundreds of thousands of them, there's enough space for them physically to get near the vessels. If you go to one of the race stopovers, Clipper, Volvo, if it's busy, you just can't get anywhere near the boats. There's only a few of them, and they're moored in one corner of the dock. So, you know, we have the ability for the public to have an up-close and personal experience with these amazing vessels. We have free public access to the vessels. Members of the public sometimes don't realise, they're astounded when they're told you've got a chance to actually go and stand on that tall ship for free. They often think you must have to pay for it. And all of the crews want to share their story. You know, the trainees are absolutely desperate to talk about their adventures, the leg they've just raced or where they're going next, and they're great ambassadors. And there's an amazing fun atmosphere. Again, anyone that's been to the tall ships ports will know there's this amazing atmosphere that goes around when the ships are in town. So the visitors, rather than being spectators looking down on some boats in a dock, they're actually almost participants in the stopover event. They are part of the whole thing. They have a much more inclusive experience than just looking at some boats in a marina. So really that was it. That was just my take on it. Having worked on the Global Challenge for 11 years, that was just my take on, certainly from the visitor's perspective, why the tall ships races are different. And I think it's all about the core values, it's about the scale of the event, and it's about the degree of open access that we offer to people. And if you combine those things together, you get a very unique and compelling visitor proposition. Thank you.